Welcome learners. Today we will be talking about physical infrastructure for a smart village, and this is unit 11 of the course. We will start with talking about importance of infrastructure. Of course, infrastructure is important for any settlement, for any development to happen, but when we are talking of smart villages and smart settlement, it becomes even more important. So, there are certain aspects which we need to know with respect to importance of infrastructure. Firstly, infrastructure can bring about major benefits in economic growth, poverty alleviation and environmental sustainability. And there is a great variation that we see within and across countries in efficiency of providing infrastructure services, but wherever it is there and wherever it is in a good condition, it is associated with improved performance of the other sectors also. So, a good performance by a country in one infrastructure sector or many infrastructure sector might lead to better performance in the overall performance of the economy as well. There are certain factors which contribute towards poor infrastructure, and as I said, there is variation in infrastructure provision from country to country, region to region. It is required to be provided, it should be provided, but it is not at par in all the countries that we see. Now, the World Development Report in 1994, it identifies 3 reasons for poor infrastructure performance. Firstly, the delivery of infrastructure services usually takes place in a market structure with one dominant characteristics. So, there is absence of competition. When there is only one provider for a certain infrastructure, of course, its performance and its overall delivery would tend to be poor. Most infrastructure services in the developing countries are provided by centrally managed public enterprises or government departments, where the involvement of the private sector is very less. Almost all irrigation, water supply, sanitation, transport infrastructure is provided in this manner. So, even telephone services in most countries were the responsibility of state some time back, but now with the coming in of the private sector, we can see the kind of transformation that the telephone infrastructure, telephone services has undergone. So, there is fall in the prices for the customers, there is better performance of the companies which are providing the telephone services, they are recovering their cost and they are in earning profits. So, the involvement of multiple service providers for infrastructure always brings about better results, and absence of competition may be one of the reasons for poor infrastructure provision. The bulk of power or electricity has also been provided by public monopoly in most of the countries. As a result, there is bad performance as far as service delivery is concerned. The second reason is that the providers are rarely held accountable for their actions and inefficiencies, and they are often compelled to deliver services below cost, not allowed to adjust prices for inflation. So, those who are charged with responsibility for delivering infrastructure are not given managerial and financial autonomy, and also they are rarely held accountable for the inefficiencies that they perform. The third reason, which is also very much prevalent in most of the developing countries, is that the users of infrastructure, both actual and potential, are not well positioned to make their demands felt. So, power prices in developing countries have generally fallen, while costs have not fallen. The costs are continuously increasing or are stable, but the prices of electricity, due to various reasons, it can be political reason or it can be social reason and so on, have they have either remained stable or they have fallen. So, we can see not just for electricity, but for water and for various other services, the costs have actually, the cost to consumers have actually remained stable or increased very slowly. So, excess consumer demand based on below cost prices is also one of the factors which has resulted in poor infrastructure delivery or poor infrastructure performance in most of the developing countries, because with low costs or below cost prices, the maintenance and operation of infrastructure services cannot be done at a efficient level. Now, when we see all these three factors, they are very much applicable to developing countries and more so to rural settlements and rural areas, because in urban areas, because of the density of population and the high population concentration in urban areas, these kind of services have over a period of time been let out to the private sector, and their prices have also increased over a period of time, bringing about better performance in urban areas. But in rural areas, all these three factors hold true, and if we see villages, there is almost no involvement of the private sector, and the government sector is usually involved in provision of these infrastructure and services, and thereby the performance of these services is quite low or is inefficient. Now, if we look at infrastructure provision and rural development and try to relate both of this, we see that there is a lot of correlation between better infrastructure provision and better rural development outcomes. The importance of infrastructure for economic growth and development in rural areas can hardly be overemphasized in a developing country like India. Improving basic infrastructure such as road, transport, electricity, health, water and sanitation is essential for development and well-being of the rural population. The development of rural infrastructure could promote economic growth, improve the standards of living of the population, and reduce the incidence of poverty by generating both farm as well as non-farm employment and earning opportunities. Increasing productivity, providing access to basic goods and services, and improving the health and physical condition of people. So, we see that in rural areas, the impact of better infrastructure is much more if we compare it with urban areas, because urban areas already have a certain level of infrastructure development. Also, a lot of migration from rural to urban areas, from villages to cities and towns, is the result of underperforming infrastructure and less infrastructure provision in the rural areas. So, the people in rural areas in search of better health facilities, better education facilities for their children, better other infrastructure such as water and sanitation and so on, they tend to migrate to urban areas. This is one of the problems which needs to be sorted out when we are talking of rural areas or villages, for transforming them to smart settlements. And a lot of empirical studies have also seen a strong relationship between infrastructure, economic growth, rural development and poverty reduction. So, if we see the cycle of rural development, if we provide better infrastructure, there would be employment generation, a reduction in poverty. Why? Because people also require all these infrastructure for better economic outcomes. So, there will be, and of course, for construction of those infrastructure services and facilities also, you would generate certain employment, and that would further lead to better employment generation in future as well. So, for example, let me give you an example of road or accessibility. If we see the northeastern states in the country, they have very low density of roads, and that is one of the major factors which has actually led to the underdevelopment of the northeastern states. So, a lot of rural settlements in these northeastern states are completely cut out from road services or road infrastructure. So, bringing them, making them access these road infrastructure would lead to better outcomes by providing them more easier access to markets for their agricultural produce, by bringing them closer to health and education services, by bringing them closer to other kind of employment opportunities in nearby larger settlements and so on. So, infrastructure development would hence bring about more employment generation and reduction in poverty through better access to education, health, skill development opportunities, and this will in turn result in rural development, and rural development would further lead to better infrastructure development in times to come. So, this kind of a cycle of rural development can be initiated if infrastructure is provided to the villages. And of course, for a smart settlement, for development of a smart settlement, as we have discussed in unit 10, infrastructure is one of the very important components. Now, what are the challenges with respect to rural infrastructure? Roads, electricity, telecommunication and other infrastructure services, they are all imperfect in the rural areas, also although they are of key importance to stimulate agricultural investment and growth. So, this is what has been said over and again, that all these infrastructure need to be provided in the rural areas for better economic outcomes. It is also argued that human well-being in terms of education and health depends crucially on infrastructure services such as safe drinking water, sanitation to prevent diseases, electricity to serve schools and health centers, and roads to access basic services for human life. So, human well-being, for that also you require all these infrastructure services. You have good, maybe you have good education and health facilities in villages, but if you have contaminated drinking water and you have poor sanitation in the villages, that might result in residents of these villages being sick more often and not being able to contribute as much to the economy, as well as not being able to access the education facilities that have been provided in the village. So, it becomes all the more important to develop these kind of infrastructure services in the rural areas. The lack of infrastructure is considered a major barrier to sustainable human development in villages, and thus for sustainable human development, which also is contributing when we talk of smart settlements and smart villages. So, for that we need to develop these kind of infrastructure. The rural infrastructure challenge for India is unique also due to various other factors. The technologies involved are hardly complex, but users are dispersed. As I said, the concentration of population in urban areas is much more, so it is easier to get advantage of economies of scale and make infrastructure provision more economically and financially viable as compared to rural areas where the population is more dispersed. So, technologically also it becomes difficult in rural areas to provide some of these infrastructure facilities like water and sanitation. Economic and financial feasibility of course is an issue, but other than that technological issues also arise. So, demand supply gap is substantial in villages, as far as these infrastructure facilities are concerned, and there are several critical implementation issues which were highlighted by the India Infrastructure Report way back in 2007. The condition has not improved, still there are crucial gaps which do exist. We will be discussing all that in the slides to come. The rural countryside is dotted with a lot of poor condition bridges, potholed roads, crumbling buildings, electricity lines that carry insufficient power, dry water supply schemes, and there are so many such problems if we see in the rural context. However, it varies from region to region when we talk of it in Indian context. So, we cannot generalize it if we see in today's context, but there are areas which have severe problems and severe gaps with respect to infrastructure provision. Therefore, the issue of sustainability of infrastructure has started being seen more critically in policy as well as media space. Long term improvement of physical infrastructure in rural areas, it warrants a bottom up approach with due involvement of the local government, and this point becomes very important. We need to see that a bottom up approach is there, where the people, they identify what kind of infrastructure needs do they require, and accordingly they go ahead with voicing their concerns. In the next unit, we will be detailing this out further. Now, the 73rd and the 74th amendments to the constitution, which came in 1992, they have kind of brought about a bottom up approach in planning and service provision, and the lower level governance structure which has been developed after the coming in of the 73rd and the 74th CAA has actually improved to some extent the infrastructure provision at the lowest level. Why? Because the concerns of the problems at the village level, at the settlement level, can now be voiced by the Panchayati Raj system which has been developed and the urban local bodies which exist. So, the 73rd and the 74th CAA gave constitutional status to Panchayati Raj institutions and urban local bodies respectively, in order to bring about greater decentralization and increase the involvement of local communities in planning, implementation of development schemes, and thus increasing accountability and transparency in their functioning. The issue of empowering Panchayati Raj institutions by transferring the triple Fs, which are function, funds and functionaries, to them has been at the center of discussion. The Planning Commission, which was there some time back, and the Ministry of Rural Development and Ministry of Panchayati Raj have repeatedly impressed upon the state governments about the need to transfer these functions, functionaries and funds in respect of 29 items which have been listed in the 11th schedule of the constitution. And this would definitely result in better outcome for infrastructure development in rural areas. So, we need to keep this in mind when we are talking of a bottom up approach of infrastructure development as well as management in the rural areas. Now, let us look at some of the infrastructure provisions and the condition of these infrastructures in the rural areas or the villages. Now, India, of course, it remains gifted with several perennial, non-perennial river systems. Groundwater, wherever available, remains a significant source of water, particularly for domestic consumption, and it contributes 80% of the household requirements and over half of the irrigation requirements in the rural areas. It has, however, been observed in rural areas that both surface as well as groundwater have been undergoing deterioration by way of increasing water pollution and lowering water table. So, the water pollution has been increasing due to various factors. So, for example, agriculture and the fertilizer and pesticides which have been a constant addition to the agriculture sector, as well as lowering of the water table. So, the water resources are also decreasing because the use of groundwater is much more than what it is getting rejuvenated. So, it is more than the rejuvenation that the groundwater is being used, because agriculture is being carried out now very intensively, and of course, as I said, the quality is also deteriorating due to various factors. States like Punjab, Haryana, Western Uttar Pradesh have been experiencing rapid deterioration in the levels of groundwater, mainly due to overuse of chemical fertilizers and pesticides and over exploitation of ground and surface water. The cropping pattern in these areas and other parts of the India has also undergone a change, whereby water intensive crops, because they are giving better value to the farmers, they are being grown in agroclimatic zones where they might not be very suitable. So, the cropping pattern, the use of inputs in agriculture, the use of water for irrigation, all these needs to be looked at when we are talking of provision of infrastructure as far as water is concerned. Now, both domestic and irrigation water is getting deteriorated as far as quantity as well as quality is concerned. And when we are talking of smart settlements, we need to look at these factors. We need to look at how water provision for domestic as well as agriculture use can be made more sustainable. Can we change the cropping pattern? Can we use certain technologies which are technologies for irrigation which make the use of water less, and so on. So, we need to give it a major thought as far as use of water in rural areas is concerned. So, after the green revolution, the dependence on rain fed cultivation has drastically reduced. As we all know, green revolution led to the development of irrigation in many parts of the country, and it has led to increase in production and productivity of crops. However, this has also led to negative externalities for the environment and natural resources. So, when we are talking of infrastructure for water, if we talk of domestic water, which is also being either drawn from the ground or from surface water sources, they are also getting impacted, and irrigation water sources are also getting impacted. Further, energy subsidies for tube wells based irrigation have further worsened the scenario in several states. Groundwater stress remains at an all-time high. For example, in Punjab, 80% of the blocks are overexploited when it comes to groundwater, and Rajasthan follows close with 71% of its block being overexploited. Thus, aquifers in majority of areas in these and other states are subjected to physically unsustainable situation, wherein withdrawal is more than recharge, leading to long-term decline in water table. Increasing urbanization has also further added to the demand of water from its rural hinterland. So, water is getting stressed, and because of this stress, the infrastructure to provide water for domestic use or for agriculture use also is getting impacted. If we look at one of the schemes which is going on full-fledged at the moment, it is the Jal Jeevan Mission, and it is envisioned to provide safe and adequate drinking water through individual household tap connections by 2024 to all the households in rural India. The program will also implement source sustainability measure as a mandatory element, such as recharge, reuse through grey water management, water conservation, rainwater harvesting. So, sustainability is one of the important aspects that Jal Jeevan Mission is actually looking at, and reuse, recycling of water and rainwater harvesting techniques to be integrated. So, it is in an integrated manner water facilities or water infrastructure has to be developed. The Jal Jeevan Mission will be based on a community approach to water and will include extensive information, education and communication as a key component of the mission. As of June 2023, around 63% of households have been connected by tap water in rural areas of India. So, still there is a gap of around 37 to 38% of the villages which do not have tap water, households in rural areas which do not have tap water connections. As far as sanitation is concerned, rural sanitation in India is a major problem, with an estimated 525 million people defecating in the open in rural areas in 2030. To tackle rural sanitation, the Indian government has mounted 4 campaigns in succession, and this was at different points of time. So, the Central Rural Sanitation Program, which was launched in 1986, followed by Total Sanitation Campaign in 1999, the Nirmal Bharat Abhiyan in 2012, and now we have the Swachh Bharat Mission Gramin, or the Clean India Mission, initiated by Prime Minister Narendra Modi on October 2nd, 2014. The Swachh Bharat Mission was launched in 2014 with an aim to achieve universal sanitation coverage, improve cleanliness and eliminate open defecation in the country. The important features of the program are as follows: construction of individual household latrines, open defecation free villages. So, it could not be attained, the 100% removal of open defecation could not be attained by 2019. It is still going on, but it has progressed quite well. And as of 2018, around 78.8% of the households in India had a toilet, which is a very good development. If we talk of rural roads, rural road connectivity is also one of the key components of rural development, and it promotes access to economic as well as social services, thereby generating increased agriculture productivity, non-agriculture employment as well as non-agriculture productivity, which in turn expands rural growth opportunities and real income through which poverty can be reduced. A study carried out by International Food Policy Research Institute on linkages between government expenditure and poverty in rural areas has revealed that an investment of 1 crore in roads lifts around 1700 poor people above the poverty line. So, you see there is a direct link between rural road development and poverty and unemployment. Public investment on road impacts rural poverty through its effect on improved agriculture productivity, higher non-farm employment opportunities and increased rural wages. And this results in lowering of rural poverty directly as well as indirectly. The rural road scheme which is currently going on is the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, which is the most comprehensive rural road development scheme in India. It was launched by the Government of India to provide connectivity to unconnected habitations as part of a poverty reduction strategy. So, the idea of providing roads was again linked to poverty reduction when it was initiated. A total of around 7.37 lakhs kilometers of roads have been constructed under the scheme till now. If we talk of electricity and energy, energy remains a critical input for transforming rural areas, with the scope ranging from lighting to cooking to irrigation, irrigating our farms. Despite the announcement of complete electrification of India, as many as 32 million households still remain in darkness without electricity. At the same time, nearly 10 to 12 crore households still use firewood for cooking, exposing the women and children to smoke, which might lead to cancer. There are regional disparities, as I said, with respect to access to electricity. Several far-flung states in the northeast, Himalayan areas, desert areas and those affected by Naxal activities have dismal performance with respect to access to power. Less developed states such as Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Jharkhand have just about 23%, 29% and 19% of households getting 4 hours or more of electricity in the evening. And this is more of a problem in the villages, in the rural parts of these states. This is showing that how much percentage of households are getting 4 hours or more of evening power supply. We see UP, Jharkhand, Bihar are one of the worst performing states. When we talk of health, and we talk of health in the rural context for the rural settlements, it has been developed as a 3-tier structure based on predetermined population norms. So, the sub-center is the most peripheral institution and the first contact point between the primary healthcare system and the community. Each sub-center is manned by an auxiliary nurse midwife or ANM and one male multipurpose worker. A lady health worker is in charge of 6 sub-centers, each of which are provided with basic drugs for minor ailments and are expected to provide services in relation to maternity, child health, family welfare, nutrition, immunization, diarrhea control and control of communicable diseases. Next in the hierarchy is the primary health center, or as we call them PHCs. They comprise the second tier of rural healthcare structure envisaged to provide integrated curative and preventive healthcare to rural population with emphasis on preventive and promotive aspects. The next is community health centers, forming the uppermost tier, and they are established and maintained by the state government under the BMS program. 4 medical specialists including surgeon, physician, gynecologist and pediatrician, supported by 21 paramedical and other staff, are supposed to staff each community health center. Now, we've seen that there is a hierarchy starting with the sub-center at the lowest level, then the PHC, then the CHC, and what all is required for these. However, when we see the performance of most of these all across the rural areas, we see that they are understaffed, they lack a lot of facilities that need to be provided, they are actually not having. Even some of the medicines are not available which they need to keep. So, there are a lot of qualitative issues when we talk of these sub-centers, PHCs and CHCs. They might be there, the physical infrastructure might be there, but when we talk of the support staff, when we talk of various other facilities and infrastructure that needs to be provided within each of these, they are lacking. So, data on facilities within these centers are not available. Most reports and evaluation studies point to the lack of equipment, poor or absence of repair, improper functioning, lack of complementary facilities such as 24-hour running water, electricity backup and so on. So, there is a great degree of absenteeism also among education and health provider, as has been the focus of research in recent times. When we talk of education, there are broadly 4 stages of school education in India: primary, upper primary, secondary and higher secondary education. And this is the same, the case is the same for rural areas as well. The combination of primary and upper primary schooling is termed as elementary education. It is important to note that there is also a program of preschool education for 3 to 6 year olds, early childhood care and education, mostly provided through the Department of Women and Child Development, Government of India, through the Anganwadi center infrastructure, which is spread all across the rural areas. And these Anganwadi center infrastructure are actually there in most of the villages, but again there might be certain qualitative issues when we talk of the food being provided to the children or the medicines and the staff. There is also a few other government and private providers of preschool and nursery education in rural areas. At the other end of the system, there is technical and vocational education as well as training and higher education involving universities and undergraduate and postgraduate institutions. 87% of the schools in India are in the country's villages. Government statistics and independent surveys have revealed that over 90% of the rural schools at elementary level are run by the governments. Only in Uttar Pradesh and Tamil Nadu does the share drop to 73 and 74%. So, we see, and this is there for the entire country, that the villages actually lack private sector in the education sector, and same applies for the health as well. So, private sector involvement, and as I said, generating competition in infrastructure provision is something which is lacking in the rural areas. There are these schemes which are running in the rural areas: the midday meal scheme for improving nutrition and improving school enrollment, the Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan for provision of education quality provision of education, which varies widely from region to region, and there is a need to address this imbalance in rural areas. And it was mandated by 86th Amendment to the Constitution of India to make free and compulsory education to children of 6 to 14 years of age a fundamental right. And it is after this that the Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan of the government of India's flagship program was developed for achieving universalization of elementary education. These are, there is also, the government has created the Rural Infrastructure Fund, Infrastructure Development Fund in NABARD in 1995-96, which is still existing. It was initiated with a corpus of 2000 crore and it still exists. And these are some of the 39 sectors under Rural Infrastructure Development Fund, which are being financed by the Government of India. So, the Government of India is trying to develop all these infrastructure in the rural areas, and there is this fund which exists for that. So, this is continuation of the kind of infrastructure that RIDF is financing. Then there is Urban Mission Infrastructure or Integrated Cluster Action Plan. So, there are 14 desirable components which have been enumerated in the Shyama Prasad Mukherjee Urban Mission, which have further been clubbed together into 4 categories: economic support system, social infrastructure, physical infrastructure and digital infrastructure. So, this again, as we have talked in unit 10, that urban mission is something which is taking ahead the idea of smart villages, and under this urban mission we see that the government has initiated in a cluster approach development of various infrastructure which are divided into economic support infrastructure like skill development and training, agro processing, agri services, social infrastructure, fully equipped mobile health units, school and higher education, and physical and digital infrastructure, which includes sanitation, piped water supply, solid waste management, street and drains, street lights, public transport and so on. And digital infrastructure includes digital literacy and citizen services. These are some of the norms and standards in various government schemes and policies. This is as part of the urban mission that these norms have been developed and can be referred to in the manual that has been developed for urban infrastructure provision, norms for urban infrastructure mission. And for economic support system, what are the norms for physical infrastructure, social and digital, all have been mentioned here. Similarly, space norms for reservation of public land, for amenities at cluster level. So, for skill development center you require minimum 500 square meter of area, and for primary health center you require 0.2 to 0.3 hectare of land, and for 20,000 population one primary health center should exist, and so on and so forth. So, for population, how much population you require a facility or an infrastructure, and how much is the area requirement, all that is mentioned as part of these norms. So, this is again for sanitation, piped water supply, solid waste and so on, right. Then it is in continuation for various kinds of infrastructure facilities, what are the norms that are available. Thank you.